I'm Bill Dallas, and I'd like to welcome you to a very special program, One Nation Under God. I'm here at the U.S. Capitol, one of the most recognized buildings in the entire world. It is here where our elected officials pass the laws that govern our great land. And it is here, back in 1954, that the U.S. Congress passed a law to modify the Pledge of Allegiance to include the words, under God, in it. The story goes like this. A local pastor at New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, just a few blocks from the Capitol, preached a sermon one Sunday in 1954 on how something was missing from the pledge. Pastor George Doherty reminded his congregants about the words under God that Abraham Lincoln had made famous in his Gettysburg Address during the Civil War. Sitting in Lincoln's pew that Sunday, February 7, 1954, was President Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower was so moved by the sermon that he agreed to support the change the pastor suggested. The next day, a bill was introduced here at the Capitol to change the pledge. President Eisenhower signed it into law on June 14, 1954. Since then, most Americans have uttered those famous words while pledging their allegiance to the United States of America. Over 50 years ago, those words truly represented the feelings of most Americans. Is that still true today? If there's one thing we can learn from history, it's that America is great not because of what we know. America is great because of what we believe and do. Today we're going to challenge your beliefs and hopefully turn them into something that will cause you to take action. Action that is absolutely necessary if we're going to turn this great land once again towards God, so that the prosperity will pour down upon our children and upon our children's children. Are you ready? Let's get started. Take well-known founding father Thomas Jefferson. Volumes have been written about Jefferson and his idea of separation of church and state. Let's look at the facts. Did you know that on December 4th, 1800, Congress approved the use of the Capitol building as a church building? Thomas Jefferson attended church at the Capitol while he was vice president and also throughout his presidency. In fact, Jefferson attended a church service here at the U.S. Capitol just 2 days after he penned his famous letter containing the wall of separation between church and state metaphor. Clearly, Thomas Jefferson had no problem with some religious functions occurring in government buildings. Yet today, Jefferson's quote on separation of church and state has been used to eliminate any mention of God from many government buildings, like public schools, for example. That's why we're doing this program, to help you understand the difference between fact and fiction when it comes to America's history. Can we truly be one nation under God when we intentionally try to eliminate the mention of God from government? It is only when we know the truth and we rise up and live out that truth with action that we can change America back to one nation under God. I'm here with Dr. James Dobson. He's the author of over 30 books, including Bringing Up Boys, Bringing Up Girls, The New Strong-Willed Child, The New Dare to Discipline. He was a professor of pediatrics at the USC School of Medicine. He's the founder and president of Family Talk. Dr. Dobson, thanks for being with me.
Well, Bill, I appreciate you inviting me to talk about such a critical topic, and I'm pleased to be part of it.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down here with us. When and why did you become so passionate about the health of the traditional family structure, particularly as it relates to the United States of America?
Well, I began to be aware of that when I was in graduate school in the 60s. And as you can imagine, many of my professors were not talking about the family. They weren't talking about marriage. They weren't talking about child rearing. And yet I felt something was going on in the culture that concerned me greatly. And some of the things that I was taught at that time was contradictory to what I believed. One of them had to do with abortion. You know, the Roe v. Wade decision came along in 1973. But in the late 80s, even then, my professors were talking about the fact that it was blatantly racist, in fact. They were talking about the fact that these kids in the inner city, they grew up without dads, they grew up in gangs, their mothers don't take care of them. It would really be better if they didn't come into the world. They were actually saying that. And naturally, as a young student, I was kind of evaluating that, and I'd come home and I'd tell my godly dad. And I'd say, well, Dad, you know, it's really kind of a mess in the inner city. And he would look at me and he would cry. And he would say, no, no, that's wrong. That's the sanctity of human life. And he said at that time, I would never cast one vote for any politician who would kill one innocent baby. And then shortly after that, we adopted a little boy named James Ryan Dobson. And that really got me. And from that point on, I saw that there are deeply important moral issues involved here, and that God wanted me to play a role in it. So since the early 70s, this has been the passion of my life.
You know, the passion comes so across just in this interview, and I'm sure people watching right now can feel and sense your passion. But some people who are watching saying, well, yeah, but Christians really shouldn't get involved in politics. That's not really our place. What would you say to that?
Abraham Lincoln said that this is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's not just for the people who don't have any faith. It's for us too. How ridiculous that Christians should not feel the responsibility in this day and age to be 1/300 millionth part of the government. That's who we are as a nation. It's a government of the people. And I regret the fact that many Christians have opted out to this responsibility. And as a result, that they have given up by default. And we're paying the consequences for that now.
Dr. Dobson, some people would say that the traditional family is outdated, particularly in a progressive, enlightened culture. What would you say to that?
Well, some people do say that, and they're wrong. Can anything that God designed and gave to us as a gift be outdated at any time in history? I mean, the family and marriage go back to Genesis 2:24, when the Creator said to Adam and Eve, for this cause, a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. That was the beginning of the family. It didn't start with man's idea or woman's idea or some kind of Christian idea. You know, the world had not heard of Christ by that time. And it had to do with God's plan for us as human beings. And he put an enormous attraction between men and women at that time. And that's been the foundation of culture, of every civilization on the face of the earth. There have been times, like in Sodom and Gomorrah, in Greece and Rome, where there was an epidemic of homosexuality. But marriage has always been between one man and one woman. Are we really going to throw it on the ash heap of history now?
So what would a responsible Christian citizen look like?
Well, I think the Scripture makes it very clear that we are to be respectful of our leaders. I think we are, even though the Scripture doesn't say it, we ought to register and we ought to vote. You know, the very thought that people will not give 15 minutes of their time to let their voices be heard, I just don't believe that's God-honoring, because we have an opportunity to have an influence over the sanctity of human life, over marriage, over how children are raised, over many, many moral issues. And we're just sort of ignoring that responsibility. And again, I think that's a mistake.
Some people would say, though, my vote really doesn't matter. Does one vote make a difference? What would you say to that?
Well, I'd like to expand the question. Does one person make a difference? Did Abraham make a difference? Did Joseph make a difference? In himself, did he make a difference? Did David? Did the Apostle Paul? Did Peter? Did the patriarchs of the Bible, Gideon, did they make a difference in their own initiative with God's help? You bet they did. And we can too, if we're not too timid to accept it.
Many people look at where our country has been heading for a while, and they think that our best days are behind us. What would you say to that?
Well, I hate to agree with them, but in some ways I do. I am most concerned about the drift away from Christian principles. If we forget who we are as a nation, if we forget the scriptural and biblical heritage that brought us to this point, there's nothing that says God has to bless us like he has. I mean, he's not obligated to do that. And so our future depends on our past, and especially where we are now. Are we going to continue to honor God with the holy living that he prescribes for us? If we don't, we're in serious trouble. And right now, I think we are.
And I go around the country, I get a chance to talk to people, and what you just said there, I always quote Deuteronomy chapter 8. There's a plan there. It's designed for a nation, right? If you focus on the vertical, he'll bless you in the horizontal. But if you focus on the horizontal and basically forget the vertical, forget God, he says it twice towards the end of chapter 8, verses 19 and 21. He says, you will be destroyed. It's basically a design for a nation. We need to turn towards him, or like you say, he has no obligation to bless us.
If anybody doubts that, look at what he did to his chosen people, the ones who were after his own heart. And they drifted away from God, and they began to worship idols, and they began to behave in ways that were contradictory to Scripture. And they paid an enormous price for it, and still do to this day. It will happen to us too. It's happened throughout the world. Whenever countries have forgotten who they are, and especially the principles that have been taught in Scripture, they did pay a price for it, and I think we will too. I happen to see this particular election cycle as absolutely critical. We're going to find out pretty quick which direction we're going. And if it's going to be as it's been in the past, where perhaps 50% of the people don't even register, and those who are, a large percentage, do not bother to just drive 2 blocks and vote. If that happens again, I hate to say it, but we deserve what's going to happen to us.
I'm here with Reverend Samuel Rodriguez. He's the president of the National Hispanic Leadership Conference. Sam, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, you are a father, you are a husband, you are a pastor, you're an author, you're a speaker, you're the president of NHCLC, and you go around the country mobilizing people to get engaged in the public arena. Why do you do that?
Because I have 3 wonderful children, and every single morning I wake up and I look at the hope in the eyes of my children, and I compare it to the despair right now embedded in our culture and society. There's a disconnect. Somehow we have to reconcile hope with a facilitative platform for success, for entrepreneurship, for religious liberty. That's what drives me to tell people across this country, we must become active in the political arena. We must vote biblical worldview. We live in very precarious times. Without a doubt, I am convinced that we're one generation away from seeing the demise of America, the nation that we hold near and dear. This nation founded on the Judeo-Christian value system, committed to personal responsibility, entrepreneurship, limited government. That's shifting and changing. But I do believe there's a firewall of righteousness and justice emerging. That prompts me to say, for such a time as this, we must vote. Christians cannot separate from the public sphere. We have a moral and biblical imperative to vote our biblical worldview in a way that's full of integrity and accountability, but we must do it in this generation, or if not, we will lose the next generation.
Well, some of the things you just said there, they seem so overwhelming, so big. Can that even change, and can any one person really make a difference?
One vote has the power of making a difference. One vote can turn the tide of whether or not life is preserved, and life is preserved not only in the womb, but the ethos of life is contextualized in an entire state and region. One vote has the power of shifting whether or not we lose our religious liberty, to preach biblical truth, to preach veritas. So one vote has the power of determining the outcome of an entire nation. So imagine if we mobilize millions of voters across this nation to vote biblical worldview. We would turn this nation back on track, and we would see a renewal and an awakening like we have never seen before.
You know, I sometimes hear you talk about the Lamb's agenda. What is that?
Well, we want to transcend political partisanship to such a degree that as a Christian community, we don't want to be manipulated or controlled or enslaved by the agenda of the donkey or the elephant. We're committed to the agenda of the Lamb. That's an agenda of sanctification and service, of covenant and community, of John 3:16 and Matthew 25, of righteousness and biblical justice. That's the agenda of the Lamb. I am convinced, not that I'm being presumptuous or uber Pollyannic, but I am convinced that the best days of our nation are yet to come. I see a generation and communities emerging across the 50 states, from New York City to LA, committed to biblical worldview. We're no longer going to go into the ballot box and to the voting booth and vote according to our cultural heritage or because our parents voted for 20 generations for a political ideology. We're going to go in there voting our biblical worldview first. My Christian heritage, my Christian worldview drives me to vote for righteousness and justice, for life and liberty. So I am convinced we're going to see renewal and awakening in America as Christians become very active in the public sphere. This is not our time to acquiesce or surrender our values on the altar of political expediency. This is the time to really mobilize the Church of Jesus Christ in defense of the values that make this nation great.
I'm here with Dr. Timothy Johnson, the president of the Frederick Douglass Foundation. Tim, thanks for sitting down with me.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
First question, what is the Frederick Douglass Foundation?
Well, the Frederick Douglass Foundation is an education and public policy organization. We started it 3 years ago, right after the election of the current president. And we really recognized that we had to do some things different. And so our pillars are, we're devoted Christians first and foremost. We're proud Americans. We're very proud to say we're proud Americans. And we're proud also to say that we're active Republicans. We also took some very strong positions on issues that historically, especially black organizations, weren't stepping out on. And that is the fact that we believe in the sanctity of life from the womb to the tomb. And we believe in traditional marriage, born a man, born a woman, married to one another one at a time.
Why is the sanctity of life so important?
Well, you know, you can take that from so many different ways. From a biblical perspective, the only giver or taker of life is God. From a standpoint of a person of color, the reality of it is Margaret Sanger and her whole eugenics movement, which led to Planned Parenthood, was really about eradicating America of all people of color. And then after she got rid of the people of color, then she wanted to get rid of all poor people, regardless of what color they were. And so I really believe that this is one of those subjects that we haven't delved into enough politically. We haven't delved into enough Christian-wise. We haven't delved into enough as a human being. You know, there's only one race, and I'm always intrigued when people talk about this race and that race. There's only one race, it's the human race. I gave an example several months back when I was at another conversation with somebody that said, you know, if it's a pit bull, if it's a Rottweiler, if it's a Dalmatian, it's still a dog. At the end of it, it's just a dog. And so this is one of those conversations I think we have to, when you talk about the sanctity of life, life is precious. And too often time we have people that want to spend time worrying about somebody that's been designated to be executed in prison, but they don't want to talk about a child who didn't do anything to anybody. It is going to be taken out of the womb of a mother because the mother was irresponsible, the father was irresponsible, and they want to use this as birth control. Again, life is precious, and it begins from the very moment of conception, not when you choose to decide it's important, but at the moment of conception, life is important. And it goes back to what you said before, one nation under God. We're not in tune with God. We're doing the devil's work, and there are too many of our so-called black leaders And I can talk about Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and a whole host of them. There are too many of them that fall right in line. Here it is, and I just have to say this. Al Sharpton came to Atlanta, Georgia, talking about Troy Davis recently, who was executed. But he also was willing to protest the billboard up in New York City, which said the most dangerous place for a black child to be is in the womb of his black mother.
Wow. Wow.
The Reverend Al Sharpton. So help me understand that. We want to talk about somebody that had 20 years to fight their conviction. But a child, he wanted that billboard down and wanted to protest it. Is that the type of reverend, the type of person we want to call reverend? I don't think so.
When you're confronted with people that say you need to act a particular way, that you need to be politically correct, what do you respond to that?
Well, you know, I don't believe in political correctness. I believe in political directness. I believe that's one of the weaknesses that we have. And in particular, if you heard Herman Cain recently, he talked about the brainwashing of blacks. I'm not brainwashed. I'm well educated. I've got a wealth of experience. I've had an opportunity to live outside the United States. And I think all those things bring into where I stand, as well as understanding and being more grounded as I get older in the Word. Those are the kind of things that I think are important. And it's too easy to put people in a box. And you know, I find it interesting that just a few weeks ago, or last week, we celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King on the Washington Monument. He said, don't judge me by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. Yet many people from the black community want to put you in that box and continue to, well, I'm black, and so I should be doing this.
Now, when you hear the words, one nation under God, what does that mean to you?
Well, it means exactly what it says, one nation under God. We are one nation. You know, our country is based on biblical principles, Judeo-Christian principles. And so I think it's one of those things that's important. When you think about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, clearly the founders had the intent of putting God. Here we have in God we trust in the halls of Congress. We have it on our money. But for whatever reason, people are scared to say those kind of words now. And I believe that this nation, which has made us unique all this time, and we're really a unique country in the amount of time that we've lasted under one Constitution, is that one nation under God.
Now, do you believe that any one person can really make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. I know any one person can make it. Again, because of our legacy of following the teachings of Frederick Douglass, an example that he set, he made a huge difference. Here's a man that once again was born into slavery in 1818 and escaped. And he became the confidant of our president. He ended up having a variety of positions with the government system. He was out there being an abolitionist. He out there spoke on behalf of women's suffrage. This is one man. And again, for me, he hasn't gotten his just dues when it comes down to history. So when you think about the accomplishments that he's made as one person, and then there are a number of other people who have also made tremendous contributions to this country, regardless of race, regardless of gender, absolutely one person can make a difference.
You are very outspoken about your beliefs. There are Christians that are watching right now that are going, oh boy, it seems you're a little out there. We've been told that we're not supposed to mix faith and politics, that we're supposed to not rock the boat. We're supposed to be seeker-friendly. How would you respond to that?
I would say, stop trying to be politically correct and be politically direct. Your moral values hopefully guide everything you do in your life, which includes how you vote. I'm always intrigued by people that say that they're pro-life, but they vote for pro-choice candidates on Tuesday. So on Sunday I was pro-life, but I changed my mind on Tuesday. I believe in traditional marriage born with a man and a woman, but on Tuesday I voted for a candidate that says they're okay with same-sex partners. I'm just a little confused. Help me understand how my moral values on Sunday changed so drastically on Tuesday, Election Day. This again becomes, I am who I am. I'm not going to waffle and say I'm one person on Sunday, and for the convenience of society or convenience of a handful of people, I change myself on Tuesday. I'm not going to do it.
Well, Dr. Timothy Johnson, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your conviction.
Thank you.
Your outspokenness and what you stand for. And you don't just stand for things, you actually go and do things based on what you stand for. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You'll never have limited government if it's a secular government. You find me any secular government anywhere in the world that's a limited government. Try France or Germany. Try Spain. Try the Scandinavian countries. They're secular. They're not limited. Man, they regulate what you think, what you do. You can't criticize Islam. You can't do this. It's unbelievable. You can't have a limited government if it's secular. So the push to have government secular in America, that's a push for the expansion of government. The only way you have limited government is to recognize that the Creator, He gives rights, government exists to protect the rights He gave us. Now, having said that, let's move into the area of how we apply that in citizenship. Because this is a simple thing. The simplest thing that every citizen should do is vote. Now, beyond that, there's a lot more you can do. But voting is the number one thing. This was always considered in America not a right. It was considered a duty. You don't have an option on this. God gave you a vote. He said, you take care of it till I get back. And a lot of people said, well, I don't want to get involved in that. God's going to say, hey, I gave you your family, we'll answer to him. I gave you your property and your possessions, we'll answer to him. I gave you all these things, we'll answer to him. And he's going to say, I gave you your government, I gave you a vote. What'd you do with that? And if we say, well, Lord, I decided not to get involved with that, hey, that's Matthew 25, Luke 19. That is not the right answer when the master gives you a stewardship. You got to answer to him for what you did with that. And we've not looked at our vote as a duty. We've looked at it as a right or a privilege or something, and it's not. If I can go back to Daniel Webster's namesake, when Daniel Webster was running for Congress back in the 1820s, there were 5,000 adults living in his district. There were 5,000 votes cast in that election. Now, he got 4,990 votes. His opponent only got 10. I guess his opponent and his family voted for him. Everybody else voted for Daniel Webster. But the point was 100% voter turnout. That's what we did, because we answered to God for what we did with the government he had given us. Now, if you look at where we are in the last 20 years, I'm going to just take you through statistics for the last 20 years on Christian voting turnout statistics. Christian voting patterns, it was not pretty. Between 1992 and 1996, we had a 17% decrease in Christian voting turnout. Between 1996 and 2000, it was an additional 23%. That's a 40% drop in Christian voter turnout in 4 elections. From 1992 to 2000, we're losing 10 points in an election for 4 consecutive. See, it's really tough because the Bible tells us in the righteous rule, the people rejoice. In the wicked rule, the people groan. But the only way the righteous rule is the righteous have to go vote for them to elect them to office. It's not going to be Planned Parenthood that elects Daniel Webster as congressman. It's going to be Right to Life people. It's not going to be ACT UP and all these gay groups that elect people that are going to defend marriage. It's got to be those people with those values who go out there and elect those people. But if Christian values won't show up to vote, guess what? You're going to get a whole lot less Christian values and Judeo-Christian belief in the elected officials we have, and that's what we were doing. So in that period, and it's not like, by the way, that we're a small group in America. You may be aware of Christian communities divided in lots of groups, but polling, they like to call them the Christian voter, they like to call them the born-again voter, and the evangelical voter. The evangelical voter is supposed to be those that are really serious about their faith. They're the ones that, according to polling, they say, I've had a personal life-changing experience with Jesus Christ. They're the ones in polling that say, hey, I believe the Bible is the basis of life. And they're the ones in polling that say, I go to church, I read the Bible, I pray at least once a week. That's supposed to be a serious Christian. You may not consider yourself an evangelical Christian. A lot of denominations don't. But by political polling, if you're serious about your faith, you probably qualify as an evangelical Christian. It's not like there's a small group in America. Quite literally, back in 2000, we had 60 million evangelicals in America, but only 15 million voted. That's 1 out of 4. So 3 out of 4 serious Christians didn't even go vote in 2000. And on top of that, we had 24 million not even registered to vote. That's 40%. That still runs pretty close today. 30 to 40% of the church unregistered is where most elections still are today, even more than a decade later. So with that kind of number, that's why in the election of 2002, there was such an effort to get Christian voter turnout. Every Christian leader you can think of got out there and say, Christians, you got to register, you got to vote your values. And the result of that was in the election 2002, we did indeed see an upturn in Christian voter turnout. We saw a rise of a full 2% in the voter turnout. Yeah, that's not much. Better than you think. We've been losing 10 points in election for 4 elections. We've now regained 10. We've turned up 2. That's a 12% trend swing. You can measure that. Now, how do you measure it? Well, if I want to see if Christian value people turn up, the one thing I'll look at for sure is the life issue. We've been polling on the life issue since back in Roe v. Wade. It's an easy issue to track from election to election. We've only been polling on marriage for about 8 years now, so it's hard to go back and say, hey, here's what Christians were thinking about marriage, because it wasn't an issue a decade ago. But it is now. So you look at where we are on the life issue. In 2002, we had 41% of all voters who said, I voted the way I did because of abortion. Within that group, you had 23% who said, well, I voted straight pro-life, and 16% who said, well, I voted straight pro-abortion. But notice that's a 7-point advantage if you happen to be a pro-life candidate running in 2002. Simply because Christians showed up just a little bit and carried their values with them, suddenly candidates get a big advantage out of that. Now, the result of that was the freshman class of 2002, when you look at it, we had 54 elected, and 36 of the 54 were freshmen were pro-life, pro-faith, pro-family. That's good. That's 2/3 freshmen in one shot. That's really good. That's how you, anything over 50.1% is making progress. We got 2/3 in one shot. In the Senate in 2002, of our freshman senators, 8 out of the 10 were pro-life, pro-faith, pro-family. Well, that's 80%. That's real, and the Senate's where we need the most help. That was 2002. 2004 came along. We saw an increase of 93% jump in Christian voter turnout. You look at the evangelical numbers, it went from 15 million all the way up to 28.9 million. Now, it's still less than half of evangelicals voting, but it's twice as much as we had, and it really jumped. And you could tell that jump, again, by looking at life statistics. Instead of 41% saying I voted the way I did because of the abortion issue, it was 42%. Instead of 23% saying, well, I'm a straight pro-life voter, it was up to 25%. Instead of 16% saying, well, I'm a straight pro-abortion voter, it was down to 13%. Now look, that's a 12-point advantage for a pro-life candidate. Hey, we showed back up, makes it easier to elect people to office who have our values. The freshman class of 2004, pretty simple. We had 40 members of the House, 25 of the 40 were pro-life, still right at 2/3. The same way, we had the Senate that year. We had 9 freshman senators, and 7 of the 9, or 77%, were pro-life, pro-faith, pro-family. Now, the reason you put people in office is you want them to reflect your values, whatever, if that's agriculture, if that's economics, anything. Well, we got pro-life people out voting. We put pro-life people in office. Do we get pro-life bills out of them? I'll point out to you, from the time of Roe v. Wade, Congress has not passed a single piece of standalone pro-life legislation to restrict the jurisdiction of abortion. Now, we had 19 measures that would restrict funding on abortion, the Hyde Amendment or Weldon-Dickey or Kemp-Cast, and all these other things that would restrict funding on abortion, but nothing to change the jurisdiction of abortion until those 2 classes got there. Those 2 classes got there. Those 2 classes didn't pass the first pro-life law in America's history. They passed the first 4 standalone pro-life laws to restrict the jurisdiction of abortion. The President signed all of them. They included things like the Infant Born Alive Protection Act, the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, the Partial Birth Abortion Ban, and the Fetal Farming Ban. The first 4. Did it make an impact? Did you know abortion has gone down 24% in America since those 4 pieces of legislation were passed? It does make a difference. If you get out and vote and put the right people in office. Now, the problem we had was the media said, you know, it doesn't matter who you vote for, they're all the same. There's no difference in any of these guys. And we bought into that. And so in the 2006 election, as it rolled around, we had a 30% decrease in Christian voter turnout. The numbers that year, we went from 28.9 million down to 20.5 million. Christians didn't show up. Now we're down to 1 out of 3 Christian evangelicals voting. The freshman class of that year, you could see the difference. In the freshman class, 54 freshmen, only 17 were pro-life. That's a 31% pro-life class. Of course, pro-life people didn't show up to vote, so guess what? It does not look like pro-life people showed up to vote. Same thing with the Senate that year. In the Senate that year, only 1 out of the 10 was pro-life, pro-faith, pro-family. Now, I'll tell you, in 2006, we actually had a national poll that said 72% of the nation thinks that marriage should be between 1 man and 1 woman. Guess what? Only 10% of the freshman senates thought that. Well, it should have been 7 of the 10. Yeah, but this is the lesson. Congress never, ever, ever reflects the values of the people in the country. Congress only reflects the values of those who voted in the last election. We didn't vote, they did. You know, one of the things that came out of the 2006 Congress was this radical agenda that started moving forward on homosexual issues. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act, these guys passed the hate crime, all this stuff that says, hey, we're going to do special things to raise homosexuals above all other people, and if you guys criticize them, you're going to, and by the way, with ENDA, if you in church don't hire a homosexual that applies, then you're going to end up with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They're going to take you to court with all the federal resources because you had a kid that wanted to be a youth director. He was homosexual. You said, well, we don't believe in that. Hey, you've discriminated. See, these federal laws that went through affected the church. And how in the world did that become such a big agenda item in 2006? Well, real easy. When you look at, for example, homosexual voter turnout in 2006, among homosexual men, 92.5% of homosexual men voted. Among lesbian women, 91% of lesbian women voted. See, they showed up. We didn't. We were down 30%. Congress reflects the values of those who get involved in any election. You come to 2008, and in the 2008 election, we did see an uptick in Christian voter turnout. It was up 66%. You remember the numbers that we had there? Started with 60 million, then went to 28.9, then went to 20.5. Now we're up to 34.1, highest recorded evangelical turnout to that point in modern history. That's good news because when Christians show up to vote, we get good stuff in the way of House and Senate. And when you look at the freshman class of 2008, only 23 of the 57 were pro-life. That's 40%. Wait a minute. I thought when Christians showed up, we had better results. We had 40% pro-life in that class. In the Senate that year, of our 14 freshman senators we had, only 2 were pro-life, pro-faith, pro-family. What happened? Evangelicals went to vote, but they didn't carry their values with them. You see, you go back into something as simple as a life issue. You remember in 2004, we had 42% say, I voted the way I did because of abortion. In 2008, it was down to only 6%. Christians showed up. We just didn't carry our values with us. See, what we cared about in 2008 was the economy. That's all that really mattered. And so what you see, 2008, number one issue, economics, 49% of the vote. 6% on abortion. Guess what marriage was? Only 3% of voters cared about marriage in 2008. Guess what? That's what Congress has been doing first 2 years after that. Well, we don't want DOMA. We don't want defense of marriage. I mean, we've seen a weakening of marriage from Congress in ways we never would have imagined, but that's because that's what the voters wanted in 2008. We didn't think marriage was an issue. We didn't think life was an issue. That brings us to 2010 election. In the 2010 elections, pretty simple stuff. Christian voter turnout, you remember the pattern, 20.5 million, 34.1. We got 30.1 million in 2010. Now, that is a non-presidential election. You always get higher votes in presidential elections, from 54 to 65% of citizens vote. Non-presidential elections, you get about 37 to 45%. We had a voter turnout in a non-presidential year that was higher than the presidential elections we'd had before it, except for 2008. So we showed back up. As a matter of fact, it was the largest off-year turnout on record that we've had in voting. Our folks showed up, and they carried their values. Instead of evangelicals being 24% of the total vote, we were up to 30% of the total vote. That's the largest percentage evangelicals have ever had in voting. Did it make a difference? Well, you look at how we did on the life issue. Remember, it was at 6%. In 2010, it jumped back up to 30%. And of the 30%, significantly, 22% said, I voted straight pro-life. Only 8% said straight pro-abortion. That's a 3-to-1 margin in favor of pro-life folks. That's a 14-point advantage. That's why we had the Senate we did. Of the 16 freshman senators, 13 of the 16 were pro-life, pro-faith, pro-family, 81%. And of the freshman House members, and Daniel Webster's up there, we have 97 freshman House members. 81 of them were pro-life, pro-faith, pro-family. That's an 84% pro-life class. So, point being, this country goes where Christians want it to go. So I'll close with this challenge from Charles Finney. You remember him in the Second Great Awakening. This is part of the quote he said yesterday. He says, if Satan rules in our halls of legislation, the pulpit's responsible for it. If we don't get people turned out with the right values, what Congress looks like is our fault. He says, if our politics become so corrupt that the very foundations of our government are ready to fall away, the pulpit's responsible for it. That's why he said, let us not ignore this fact, my dear brethren. Let us take it to heart and let us be thoroughly awake in our responsibilities in respect to the morals of this nation. The church must take right ground in regard to politics. Politics are part of a religion in a country as this. Now, how's that? How's politics part of it? Because it's stewardship. You see, in this country, politics says, hey, it belongs to you, the people. Well, if we're going to be faithful to God, we've got to be faithful to the stewardships He's given. That's why politics is part of a religion in a country such as this. And Christians must do their duty to their country as part of their duty to God. He said, God will bless or curse this nation according to the course that Christians take in politics. It's exactly right. That's exactly where we are today. And that's the challenge I'll leave you with. We have got to get involved again in this thing. We've got to get back involved. And again, if you want more information, blackroberegiment.wallbuilders.com. We've got all sorts of stuff there, voting information, scorecards on all congressmen. I mean, it's real easy to know where these guys are on every issue. So thanks for letting me share with you, but let me encourage you to get involved. We've got to turn the country back in the right direction. God bless you guys.
I truly hope what you heard today inspired and challenged you. But as we said earlier, being challenged is not enough. We need to take action. So I hope you'll go to championthevote.com, where we've laid out a lot of action steps that you can take. Remember, it's up to you and me if America is to remain one nation under God. I'm Bill Dallas for United in Purpose, and we'll see you next time. I want to let you know that if you've been enjoying today's program, you can purchase a copy by going to championthevote.com. The cost for the DVD, including shipping and handling, is just $5. We've intentionally kept the price low so that you can get a copy for yourselves as well as one for friends and neighbors.